Fighters are the soldiers of space conflicts, giving their pilots great maneuverability along with firepower and armour. If left unchecked, squadrons of fighters can cause serious damage to even the largest of warships. Fighters come in a range of different sizes. Generally, you want to build a fighter which will fit in your fleet's hangars and landing pads for ease of use. Typically, the larger a fighter is, the more survivable it will be. However, this will also impact the handling and make it an easier target. A key part in designing a fighter is finding that balance in size which works for your fleet and for your combat preferences. Fighters typically carry multiple types of weaponry. The main thing fighters should excel in is taking down other fighters, bombers and small crafts. However, fighters can and will make strafing runs on large ships, and for this reason one or two heavier weapon payloads can come in handy. Gatling guns are a fighter's best friend. They are extremely effective at shredding through small grid armour and components. However, a strafing run with Gatling guns will rarely do any substantial damage to larger warships. Autocannons can be a great middle ground. They aren't as effective as Gatling guns for dealing with fighters, but they are much better for hitting larger targets. You will also need to be more accurate as they have a much lower fire rate than Gatling guns. Rocket pods are brilliant for using on larger vessels for a quick bombing run, delivering quick bursts of explosive damage. Many fighters also employ turrets. This can be useful when fighting multiple opponents to cover your back, but they will take up a lot of space and increase the overall fighter size. Fighters need to be extremely careful when enemy corvettes are on the field. Corvettes are designed to take down entire squadrons of fighters single-handedly. They deploy quick-firing weaponry and big thruster packs to screen their capital ships from fighters. Enemy fighters and interceptors will also directly be targeting you. These need to be dealt with quickly. If left unchecked, they will harass your larger warships. Almost all ships corvette size and above will at least have some point defense, or failing that, they will be wielding very heavy weaponry, which can be easy to avoid, but if you do get hit, you'll probably be knocked out of the fight. Fighters are an extremely valuable asset in a conflict. They can make or break a battle. If the enemy fleet also has fighters, you should use yours to counter them, along with corvettes for support to give yourself a fighter advantage. From there, you can use your fighters to harass larger enemy warships and shoot down any bombers or smaller vessels coming for your fleet. Gunboats bring close fire support to infantry and unarmed vessels. They can carry troops or use fixed weaponry to support assaults. Gunboats are the smallest large grid warships. They should have the bare minimum on board, often just enough to get them moving and functioning correctly. Despite this, some armour is necessary. Given their role will be providing close fire support, they will need to be able to take on smaller caliber rounds. A gunboat's armament can vary depending on its intended use, though most of the time it's useful to deploy anti-infantry weaponry primarily, as well as some sort of support payload. I would highly recommend Gatling turrets, whether they are custom or not. These are effective against infantry and are also good at hitting small grids and fixed emplacements with their high fire rate. Interior turrets can also be employed. These are still effective against infantry and don't require conveyoring. Rocket pods are excellent for bombing runs on enemy infantry or fixed weapon emplacements, providing rapid bursts of explosive damage. Corvettes pose a serious threat to gunboats. They are able to keep up whilst taking any returning fire. Since they are equipped to deal with fighters, they will usually have very fast firing and high velocity guns, which will make it extremely difficult to avoid. In the fleet, Gunboats should be deployed in groups and used to support ground infantry or fire support against fixed emplacements. Gunboats are ill-equipped to take on any larger warships in a fleet, because their size makes it extremely difficult to survive higher caliber weaponry. They can also be employed effectively as short-range escort ships, since their speed will be helpful in chasing down pirates or even doing some pirating yourself. Extremely fast and heavily armed, gunships are able to keep up with fighter craft while wielding heavy weaponry. They are a deadly force on their own, but when deployed in groups they can overwhelm much larger targets. Gunship sizes can vary drastically depending on their role. However, they are typically no larger than a corvette in a fleet, and sometimes can be as small as fighters and bombers. Keeping their size down is essential to make sure they are able to keep pace with fighters and smaller craft. They are typically well armoured and can take a reasonable amount of punishment, since they may spend time stationary to better aim fixed weaponry. Ground support gunships should have heavy forward armour to defend against returning fire and allow them to operate for much longer. As suggested by the name, gunships carry a disproportionate amount of weaponry for their size. Weapon types can vary depending on roles, such as hitting ground targets and infantry, or dealing with fighters and bombers in space. In general, the majority of gunships' surface area is dedicated to weaponry, allowing them to pack a punch for their size. This heavy focus on weaponry often means sacrifices in other areas such as system redundancies or interior features. It's a good idea to bring a range of weaponry. This allows you to deal with a multitude of targets with a weapon for every situation. It also means you can be more versatile in your attacks and strategies. Fixed weaponry will provide great accuracy and deadly damage to stationary or slow-moving enemies. These are often the gunship's primary armament. Being fast and manoeuvrable, gunships are able to make excellent use of these fixed weapons. Turrets can provide secondary firepower. Gatling or autocannon turrets are excellent against smaller, faster targets and are quick firing. Missile turrets and assault cannons will provide quick bursts of damage to larger vessels and stations. Gunships play key parts in engagements. Their speed and deadly bite makes them a fierce opponent. Small grid gunships are often used as ground fire support or for assault on ground bases, using heavy forward firepower to decimate enemies. Larger gunships can play an anti-fighter role in fleets and are excellent as escorts, especially if they feature heavier weaponry. Gunships are also best deployed in swarms. This usually provides enough firepower to overwhelm much larger enemies quickly. Fast, manoeuvrable, and essential in protecting capital ships, corvettes are an important component of any fleet. In this video, I'll be discussing some of the key features, design choices, and roles of a corvette-class warship. Typically, corvettes will sit between a fleet's frigates and gunships in terms of dimensions. This allows them to keep up with smaller craft while also packing a punch. In terms of armour, you want to aim to make the ship as light as possible, so it can keep up with fighters and other small craft while still protecting the ship's main systems. This is best done through light armour and spaced armour panels, giving you effective protection at little weight cost, though some heavy armour can be useful in very critical areas of the craft. Corvettes are best suited to fast-firing, high-velocity weaponry. This allows them to accurately target fighters and small ships as well as incoming missiles or torpedoes. That being said, it's often a good idea to pack one or two weapons that can damage capital ships, so that if you happen to get an opportunity to hit one, you can. Interior turrets are a great choice to dot around a corvette. I recommend setting them to target missiles and characters only. These will provide protection against potential boarders and incoming missiles, but they will do very little against other ships, so it's best to save their ammo. Gatling turrets are great against fighter craft. Their firing rate can make them very hard to dodge at close range. Custom flak turrets using small grid autocannons are arguably the best fighter defense you can make. With fast firing rate and heavy hitting rounds, they will deal serious damage. However, they are more complicated to repair and harder to make in survival scenarios. For hitting larger ships, I would recommend 1 or 2 assault cannons or forward artillery guns. These are great for taking pot shots at larger ships and will do considerable damage if they manage to connect with a small craft. Corvettes should focus on providing a protective screen around capital ships, shooting down any missiles, torpedoes or fighters that are attempting to damage them. Using their speed and manoeuvrability to harass fighter squadrons and taking pot shots at larger ships when given the opportunity. Without corvettes to protect them, cruisers and larger ships would have to rely on their own point defence systems, which would take their gun sights off larger, more threatening targets, as well as using their own armour to take the hits from the fighters and the bombers. Designed to kill other ships and bringing some of the heaviest hitting weaponry to bear, destroyers pose a serious threat in any engagement. Destroyers typically hover around frigate size, though this can vary drastically depending on their weapon complement. Their designation is focused heavily on their role in the fleet, opposed to their size. Armour on a destroyer is best forward focused to complement their head-on approach, but armour in general should be a secondary focus for destroyers. The armour they do have should be used to cover forward guns and reinforce key areas. A destroyer's armament is its strength. It should wield weapons capable of inflicting damage to much larger ships than itself. Weaponry should be the primary focus of a destroyer, with the rest of the ship designed around its armaments. Point defence grids on destroyers can often be waived, and instead rely on other ships for protection from fighters, while wielding more anti-capital weaponry. Although, it's a good idea to have a few interior turrets, just to protect against stray fighters and missiles. Assault cannons and missile turrets can cause major AoE damage to enemy ships. It's best to focus these at the front to combine with forward weaponry. These will usually end up dealing the majority of the damage in a fight, so it's essential to stagger their firing arcs. Forward weaponry should be the focus for destroyers. Fixed forward artillery guns are great for targeting specific systems and engaging at longer ranges, while rocket pods can offer rapid AoE damage and do serious damage at closer range. Railguns can also be employed, though their slow fire rate limits their damage potential. They are best used as an opening shot into an engagement. Destroyers play a similar role to tank destroyers. Their sole purpose is to knock out enemy vessels. To play to this, they need to operate within a fleet, where they receive point defence protection from friendly ships. Then they can pick out a target and use their fearsome firepower to quickly inflict serious damage. They should focus on using a frontal approach and staggered guns to overwhelm enemy ships before retreating back into the protection of a fleet. Serving as multi-role support vessels, frigates can be considered the building blocks of any competent fleet. Offering good firepower and solid armour, they are capable of holding their own in fleet engagements. Frigates will typically sit between a fleet's corvettes and cruisers in terms of size. This allows them to take more punishment than corvettes, as well as being able to wield heavier weaponry. A frigate's armour can vary drastically depending on its role. A good general layout is a light armoured body with heavy armour panels in key areas, along with decoys and spaced armour. This will give them good manoeuvrability while protecting the key areas of the ship and not using too many resources. There are also many subclasses of frigates, for example light, heavy and assault frigates. These are more specialised to focus on certain roles. Frigates are armed to be able to damage capital ships. Their weaponry should have a focus on taking on larger ships rather than fighters and small vessels. This is to help serve their support role and offer extra firepower for a fleet's capital ships. For weaponry, I would recommend a basic point defence grid at first, whether this be Gatling turrets or custom made point defence turrets. These are to fend off any fighters or torpedoes closing in on the ship. Then, you want some heavier hitting weapons. These will be used to hit large vessels. I recommend assault cannons or missile turrets. These provide quick bursts of area damage, potentially blowing through hull armour and hitting hydrogen tanks or ammo storage. Finally, you will want some long range, heavy weaponry, either artillery turrets or custom assault cannon turrets. These are for engaging at longer ranges and for targeting specific systems on enemy ships. Frigates act as support ships in a fleet. They increase the total firepower of the fleet and can bring extra fighters and point defence. They act as support craft for the cruisers by helping target enemy capital ships as well as hitting corvettes and other frigates. In smaller battle groups, frigates can act as capital ships or command vessels due to their flexibility. However, they should not be self-sufficient and should require support from ships for them to function for long periods of time on their own. Bringing fighters and bombers to the front lines, carriers can deploy squadrons of crafts to defend the fleet or go on the offensive. This makes them extremely important in any kind of fleet engagement, but also a major target. A carrier's size can vary greatly. Their classification is based on being specialised for carrying smaller vessels opposed to how large they are. That being said, in general, carriers sit around frigate or cruiser size, as this is usually sufficient to carry a sizable fighter complement and all the systems necessary along with it. The size of carriers in a fleet also depends greatly on the size of the fleet's mainline fighters, with smaller fighter fleets usually operating smaller carriers due to them not needing as much room. Carriers are typically lightly armoured. The main purpose of the armour is to protect the fighters within, as they are the most valuable part of the vessel. This can be done by a simple layer of armour around the hangar. Some specialised carriers disregard armour completely in favour of quicker launch times with exposed flight decks or externally carried fighters. Typically, a carrier's armament should be focused on defence and protecting its fighters while they are aboard. This usually consists of a first point defence grid and sometimes short range heavy hitting weaponry. Since carriers will be well protected and escorted within a fleet, they won't get many opportunities to hit enemy capital ships with their own weaponry, so typically long range guns will be dead weight. I recommend equipping strong point defence turrets. Fast turning and fast firing should be the focus. Gatling turrets are useful for taking down missiles and torpedoes. Their quick turning rate and high rate of fire is useful for laying down heavy continuous fire to deter fighters from getting it close, or even smaller large ships. Custom autocannon flak turrets are great at knocking out enemy fighters. These should play a key role in your main anti-fighter batteries. Missile turrets can also be very effective at close range, and if they land a hit on a small craft, it's often devastating. They can also inflict serious damage to corvette-sized vessels should they stray too close. A carrier's strength lies in its fighter complements. A carrier should have the majority of its interior volume dedicated to storing and maintaining its fighter complement, in addition to sustaining the extra crew and facilities for manufacturing new parts and components for its squadrons. There are also multiple subcategories of carriers. Strike carriers are designed to jump in and quickly throw out fighters while also providing fire support as more of a hands-on carrier. Assault carriers usually have less hangar space and instead play the role of a frigate or a cruiser once their fighter complements are deployed, fielding their own cannons and heavy weaponry. During an engagement, carriers should offer a safe area for fighters and bombers to land, refuel, repair and rearm. They must have an escort at all times during engagements, as they will be specifically targeted by enemy warships due to them being some of the most important ships. Being the largest ships in most engagements, cruisers are often seen serving as capital ships in fleets. Bringing heavy firepower and strong armour, trading blows with the cruiser will usually end badly. Cruisers will typically sit above frigates in terms of size in a fleet. They use this extra size for production facilities, hangars and more spacious storage areas. However, this extra size makes them an easier target at range as well as for detection. Cruisers should be well armoured and protected. Since they are often vital in winning an engagement, they need to survive as long as possible during battle as to maintain command of the other vessels fighting. Cruisers generally have a well-rounded armament. They will mostly be targeting other cruisers and larger ships, so heavy gun batteries are preferred. It's also important to ensure good firing arcs all around the cruiser. Since smaller craft will try to flank you, it's best to be able to hit targets on all sides. A point defense field around a cruiser is crucial. Since they can operate on their own, this will help protect them from multiple smaller vessels. For a point defense grid, it's best to have custom PDCs or flak turrets. These can make short work of fighters and bombers. Although cruisers can rely on screening vessels while in fleets, if serving alone, they will need to defend themselves against multiple smaller targets. Heavier weaponry like assault cannons and missile turrets can be useful against frigates and larger ships. These provide quick bursts of area damage. Assault cannons in particular are cheap to build and fire. But mainly, cruisers should focus on fielding long-range, armour-piercing weaponry, such as artillery turrets or custom assault cannon turrets. This allows them to engage targets at longer ranges and focus specific systems on enemy cruisers. Custom-made torpedoes can provide excellent damage against enemy cruisers and larger ships. These can be implemented as torpedo tubes or externally mounted non-reloadable torpedoes. Cruisers play a key role in the fleet. They should be self-sufficient anchors containing full production facilities and hangar complements to land and repair fighters. During battle, cruisers should typically focus their fire on other cruisers or capital ships, whilst also taking most of the punishment from the enemy cruisers. They can also operate on their own missions, carrying their own defense squadrons if needed. The cruiser class also has many specialized variations, such as light, heavy and artillery cruisers. Light cruisers are less heavily armoured and smaller in size, while still maintaining the capabilities of a cruiser at the cost of survivability. Heavy cruisers bring heavier armour and more firepower at the cost of manoeuvrability and price. Artillery cruisers focus on bringing the biggest weapons to bear in an engagement, often built around a single turret or gun emplacement. Designed to directly engage and destroy enemy capital ships, battlecruisers play a key role in hunting down and destroying enemy vessels. Thanks to their heavy firepower and long-range weaponry, they are extremely deadly to enemy cruisers. Battlecruisers generally sit around heavy cruiser sizes, sometimes slightly larger or smaller. Their size is dependent on how much weaponry is needed on the hull, which is determined by its intended targets. Generally though, a smaller battlecruiser will have an easier time avoiding incoming fire and will take longer for turrets to lock onto. A battlecruiser's armament should focus on strong main batteries to inflict long-range damage against enemy cruisers. It can have multiple different types of weaponry, as well as a point defense grid for its own protection. Since they will be mainly engaging capital class vessels, high caliber weaponry will be needed to be effective at longer ranges and to heavily armoured ships. A strong point defense grid is a good idea. Nothing too extreme, just a good layer of missile, hydroman and fighter protection wrapped around the ship is extremely useful. To achieve this, I would recommend some Gatling turrets or some custom flak turrets. These can be conveyed up for ease of use and provide high fire rates and high velocity rounds. For secondary gun batteries, assault cannons or missiles provide good mid-range quick bursts of damage against medium-sized vessels. For main gun batteries, you want artillery turrets or custom artillery cannons. These can be used at long distances and can pierce enemy armour. Battlecruisers are susceptible to enemy battleships. If caught in a firefight, they often won't be able to stand toe-to-toe and trade shots and will end up losing. Groups of destroyers can also pose a threat, especially if they manage to get in close and surprise attack the battlecruiser. A battlecruiser aims to be able to hunt down and kill capital ships by itself, retaining some of the qualities of cruisers, but with a much higher focus on its gun batteries for inflicting damage on enemies. Often they can serve alone or as part of a small battle group, best served to engage enemy capital vessels that are alone or have little to no escort.